Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing fine, ready and raring to go.
Yeah, lots of news.
There's still a few problems out there. The two main problems, I guess, have been occupying our activities for a year or so. If you add CDC and the current foreign policy, which was quiescent for a while. It seems to have been activated with this new president. He hasn't made things better, although they're all a bunch of interventionists to some degree.
Yeah.
This thing is on Biden is sort of exploding on him. I think he. If you're a Republican, a diehard Republican, you might say, "Hey, he's splitting the Democratic Party," and maybe the Republican Party is a little bit split on coronavirus too.
Yeah.
Because of the disagreement on how to handle it. Anyway, I want to start off with something to dealing with coronavirus and. People, we have to say that if you're in the drug business and you have a little bit of Pfizer stock, you might say, "Hey, my stock went up. My stock went up," and for a reason, because the collusion was working. They were pestering for a while. We knew that the pharmaceutical companies and the government are almost one and the same. At least, the drug lobby has tremendous power in Washington. But the news was Pfizer jab receives full approval. They've talked about this for long because they've only been doing it for 18 months now and pouring it out and making billions.
Yeah.
But and some people argue the case that you're not supposed to do that. If you're in the establishment, you're supposed to wait for an approval. But that didn't matter. There was a super emergency. What they haven't added up yet are the complications that may be tied to the vaccine and the current treatment. That there's a lot of hint that there's going to be a large number of people that it was short of having tremendous benefit from the vaccine. Full approval of the Pentagon and also the Pentagon vaccinations for all troops. Now that they have it, it's approved now. Because I guess they didn't. It would be an embarrassment if they gave the vaccine to the troops. That's 100% government,
Yeah.
And then if there were a lot of complications, maybe more attention. This way, these thousands of complaints that we hear about, but nobody really pays much attention to it. They can ignore a lot of that, and now they're feeling good about it. Stock market goes up for the pharmaceuticals, and even the big stock market, the whole stock market seems to go up. So they're not worried about Afghanistan, the marketplace, and they're not worried about the COVID. They should be worried about it, and they should be worried not so much about things that they shouldn't have to worry about, like who's running Afghanistan, as much as who's running the United States, and are our liberties being protected here. I'd like to see that orientation, and of course that's the theme of what our program does, is try to orient not only internationally and talking about a proper role in international affairs, but also what concerns should we have for the ramifications of all this mischief on the liberties of individual citizens in this country, and that right now is riding pretty high. If people ever wake up and many have. But if they wake up and decide, my freedom is important, maybe we ought to deal with that, because as the economy deteriorates and the foreign policy deteriorates and the empire shrinks, domestically it's going to be a big battle unless we have a completely different attitude about what the proper role of government is.
Well, this is a big deal, and it's also at an unprecedented speed that it was approved. But it's going to be sold as this is the final stamp of approval. The FDA is God. God Almighty has spoken, and if you don't get a jab, then you're against God and the science. But we know that the FDA's record of approving drugs is not all that great. Anyone who's had some Vioxx problems, thalidomide problems, you can go down the list of drugs that have been approved that have actually had to be rescinded. So it's not as set in stone as one might think, or certainly as the mainstream media might want to portray. But the thing that we do know is that every American who wants to have a shot has either gotten it or can easily get it without a problem. So what does it mean to have the full FDA approval? for 12 and above. Actually, the 12 and under, that's still under emergency use at this point. But what does it mean? It means I think the door is open now for vaccine mandates. It's going to be get the shot or get out of work. But what's interesting that we see, Dr. Paul, is that's running up against something else, which is this fundamental labor shortage. And I know this is anecdotal, but I've seen several things where a small company would say, listen, guys, you need to get your shot or you're going to get fired. And they all got together and said, okay, we're leaving. And then they changed the rules. I've seen that several times on Twitter over the weekend. And again, it's anecdotal, but it's going to be interesting how those two are going to square.
An example of what you just described is what happened in Houston at the Methodist Hospital.
Yeah.
You know, people should take note. What's going on if the people who were involved in participating, you know, to an extreme in helping people who had COVID, the nurses and the aides who were exposed, and they come up with a conclusion, I don't want the shot.
Yeah.
And you'd think they would at least be recognized. Why aren't you doing this? They must have a perception. So they were fired, laid off temporarily, you know, but they were out of there. Now you hear the advertisements. They're going all across the country to find nurses.
Yeah, please.
Nursing shortage. So all this thing about a lot of jobs available and nobody available, nobody wants to work, it is so different than if you're in a depression and there are jobs, no jobs available. Now they had jobs available, you can't find the people. Only government could create a situation like that.
Such a mess.
You know, back to on this FDA and the approval of this drug and what will happen, and you make the point that the final opinion is not yet, and it's going to be determined. But the one thing that I personally respond to and have a great deal of concern on the vaccine is the effect it has had and the reports on people with heart trouble.
Yeah.
You know, the myocarditis and they don't know about that, and of course they're not going to advertise that. And now that it's changed, and it's more experimental. You know, 1 didn't work, 2 must work. Now we're going to 3, and we're going to expand the market for the shots.
Yeah.
So I think. But I don't think, if we continue to do what we're doing now and pretend to keep records, we're not going to know in a year or two. We might not know in detail, for quite a few years to count it and try to dissect this out and analyze it. But already there are some physicians who are much closer to caring for heart patients that have had the vaccine. They're concerned about it.
Yeah, we even saw data that there is an increase in young people with heart problems. But you made a good point, which is about the FDA approval. And one of the doctors that I was looking at on Twitter said, this has got to be unprecedented that the FDA has approved a drug without giving a recommended dosage, because we don't know. Is it a 1 shot? Is it 2 shot? Now is it 3 shots? So nobody knows what the dosage is. Someone else can look that up. But Alex Berenson, we talk about a lot. He just tweeted out something interesting from Israel, which is a lot of people there are taking the 3rd dose, and I think 15 of them have died now after that. So let's put up that first clip. This just kind of says what we were talking about. FDA gives full approval for Pfizer, but still remains emergency use for 12 to 15-year-olds, pending more data. But here's the thing, Dr. Paul, and if we can go to the next one, there are a lot of questions that remain. We do not have the answers, but these questions are no longer being asked by people who've been kicked off the social media. This is the mainstream media asking big questions about it. And here's Bloomberg over the weekend. There's growing concern that vaccinated people may be more vulnerable to serious illness from the COVID Delta variant than previously thought. Let's go to the next clip, because this is the first 2 paragraphs of that Bloomberg article, mainstream. Anecdotes tell us what the data can't. Vaccinated people appear to be getting the coronavirus at a surprisingly high rate, but exactly how often isn't clear, nor is it certain how likely they are to spread the virus to others. Okay, we don't know. Then they go on to say, though it's evident vaccination still provides powerful protection against the virus, that's their claim, there's growing concern that vaccinated people may be more vulnerable to serious illness than previously thought. And I think that's a really big question mark. And in fact, another mainstream, in fact, a government publication. Let's look at the next one. The BBC put out this astonishing tweet over the weekend. If we could do that third one. Very, very astonishing tweet raising the questions. BBC, is catching COVID now better than the vaccine? Now we appear to have some protection. Do we need to keep boosting, or can nature take its course? BBC, Dr. Paul, writing about the potential benefits of natural immunity. So I just kind of sense the tide turning a little bit with these questions.
Well, that's hopefully we have some enlightenment is what we really need. So did you have another thing on that?
No, we'll have to keep an eye on this approval.
Right. Now I want to shift a little bit over to the mask business. We talked a lot about the mask already last week. We will continue to talk about it because there's lots of controversy. And now it looks like the people are too many. It sounds like too many people are accepting this thing. Oh, we're going to get wearing a mask again, and parents they claim are demanding it. The teachers we know always demanded it. So it's back to it. But here's an article on Zero Hedge. It says CDC buries. I can't believe that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe the CDC wouldn't be open to us. CDC buries study finding that students masking has no statistically significant benefit. It doesn't say it causes harm, but there are people out there who say that there's not only no help, but there's some harm done with the mask. But this particular article is making the point that the CDC didn't particularly want even this article to get out, and it's still amazing. They must have employees there that they can't control everything that gets put on the CDC site. And once in a while, the truth comes out or the proper role is done. So they didn't recommend it, but it actually got printed in a CDC study.
Well, this was a big investigative report, and again, mainstream media is starting to get a little bit curious about this. This is the New York Magazine, hardly a fringe publication, at least from the mainstream perspective. They looked into this study that the CDC did in May of this year, a massive study, 92,000 people involved in this study. And what it found, as you say, is no statistically significant difference between school children masked or unmasked. And what the CDC did is that when it summarized this entire study, it simply left that part out and left the other parts in, talking about the benefits of increased ventilation and HEPA filters, et cetera, et cetera. They left the part out that showed that the masks didn't do much at all. And the New York Magazine, to its credit, is hiring some journalists. They looked into it and said, this is a real question mark. And we know this because countries overseas, even in Europe, which is hysterical about the virus, kids at school are not masked. They're not forced to wear masks. And not only that, not only did they fail to mention the results of this part, or at least to emphasize what should be an important study, and this is the New York Magazine, on July 9th, a little more than a month after the study was published, the CDC released updated guidance for schools, including the recommendations that masks be worn. So their own study 2 months earlier said masks do nothing. 2 months later they said wear the mask. Tell me that's not politics over science.
It doesn't make much sense, does it? So here's another article that John Ander published. And his conclusion is not only he's not neutral on this, it doesn't harm or protect. This says most face masks won't stop COVID-19. Indoors study warns. And of course, that's been around for a long time. And he says new research reveals that cloth masks filter 10% of exhaled aerosols, with many people not wearing coverings that fit their face. So this is the whole thing. But it's a symbol. It's a political symbol now. It's a religious symbol, and I use that word very casually. They have a religious fervor because it drives to hate the devil, and of course, the devil is our president, or our former president Trump. He's the one that has to be attacked, and but then this attack, I I've often thought about the Republicans who turned, which they had every right to if it was done on principle, because we've made our own criticism. But it seems to be so emotional. My argument for all that business on the campaign was that most of these people, especially disgruntled Republicans, and the Democrats are very, very jealous.
Yeah.
Jealous because he said what he believed, and the real tragedy was that people liked what he was saying or liked to hear a straight talk. So they support him. But what happened was this was converted, jealousy just has converted into outright hatred. And that's why you see all this stuff. And of course, we vote for Trump being more consistent on his efforts because we praise him when he says something right, but we're not going to be hesitant if he's muddying up the waters.
Yeah, and he said some dumb things at his rally that he was booed for. But I guess we'll move on to something else. And again, Dr. Paul, I mean, people are going to stop watching us because we're the mainstream media now, but this is a exclusive that Reuters had over the weekend, actually on the 20th of August, which is that the FBI reported that they have scant evidence, quote, scant evidence that the January 6th attack on the Capitol was the result of an organized plot to overturn the presidential election result. So all the hysteria from Pelosi on down, everyone's saying this is the worst insurrection since the Civil War. AOC cowering for her life inside the building, needing to have therapy afterward because she was so traumatically disordered because of it. The FBI has been combing the world for evidence, arrested 570 coup plotters, and then it throws up its hands and says, you know what, there just isn't evidence that this was anything remotely like an organized coup attempt.
But you have to, I at least think about how does this work? How does the operation work? Because we do know that the Haydens of the world and the big shots who run it and the insiders and the deep state have a lot of control. But all of a sudden when they come up with this, I don't think they sit around and say, hey, we have to give in on this issue. I think that there's still an element of truth finders, even in the FBI. Matter of fact, over the years, I met quite a few people who had been in the FBI, and I didn't see them as sinister people.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of respect, sometimes not necessarily accurately bestowed upon the FBI. But anyway, there's somebody who came up with that. They had to admit there's no evidence for that, and but it'll get buried or forgotten, and. But there'll be somebody out there will keep talking about it, and it's information that we do need to know about.
But you know, it's important because this was the basis of the second Trump impeachment. So the whole thing was bogus. They didn't even do an investigation first. That was his impeachment. That's his ban from social media. That's the ban from many others from social media that they were part of this insurrection. And in fact, it's funny, and I should have found the picture, but someone posted a meme over the weekend. It just had a bunch of that goofy guy with the horns inside the building. This is not an insurrection. And underneath it, it showed the Taliban taking power and sitting at the presidential desk with their guns. This is an insurrection. This is what it looks like. A bunch of guys with guns who literally take over. Not a bunch of goofballs with horns on their heads.
You know, I'm always disappointed that when we see this evidence, and it seems so logical for us to look at this and say, people should be skeptical more so than ever. They should question about masks, and they should question about the treatment, and at least listen to the doctors who say, you know, outpatient treatment with medications unapproved by the FDA and in a way prohibited by the FDA. Why can't people just look at it? And why I want more skepticism, but most of the time people, as troubles brew, they want more and more government. You know, it's sort of the saying, the government screws up the monetary system. It's too much printing press money. So what we need is more and more and more.
Yeah.
So if you have regulations messing things up in this employment thing we mentioned just a little while ago, people are they can't find enough people to work in a weak economy, and it's all a construct of bad economic policy. I want people to be more questioning we have a right to, we have an obligation to. It's a moral obligation that we have. We have a constitutional obligation to try to live, within reason, following the rules on restraints on the government. One part of the Constitution I like the best, and there's several I don't like, but the whole idea is there's a lot of thou shalt not to the federal government.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, if it benefits the opposition right now, if a state governor is doing something better than the national government, then they'll defer the state government. But most of the time, the separation of local authority and federal authority is very difficult. A federal authority and international authority, it's difficult to do. And now we have the problem of distinguishing between the authority of the corporate state and the banking state. I mean, that's when it gets very hard for an easy solution. I say less government.
Yeah.
The least is the best.
Well, here's the final, at least my final word on this, which is the more troubling aspect of the fact that now they're saying, hey, that wasn't really an insurrection, because calling it that at the time, if you remember, that was a way to squash any kind of questioning of the election, because if that was the case, then if you were questioning the election, then you were one of the insurgents. You are therefore possibly going to get arrested. So if there was shenanigans going on in the elections, and there looks to be some evidence always that there is, if something funny was going on, it was a fantastic, perfect way to cover it up by saying, hey, you better not question this vote, because otherwise you are an insurgent and you're going to go to jail. I think that shut a lot of people up.
And for some reason, the logic of it all was, if there was truly, which I do believe, reason to question exactly what went on, that instead of forcing people to make conclusions on both sides with the absolute truth and fight it out, why don't both sides agree to have a true audit?
Yeah.
And find out what went on. But there's one side that wants the audit, and the other side that doesn't. Should make you rather suspicious of what's going on. So Bush era NASA head. We didn't do that.
Yeah,
Hayden.
Michael Hayden.
Hayden, boy,
unbelievable.
This is I couldn't believe this one. Bush era NSA head says it's a good idea to send unvaxxed Trump supporters. Where would he want to send them? To protect it? Are they going to be quarantined? Yeah, he wants to send them to Afghanistan, quarantine them in Afghanistan, go for a 3-year tour.
Yeah.
So
let's put up that tweet.
That is really pretty wild. I wonder how well. I guess it's happened in the past. People get a shorter prison term by volunteering for the military.
Yeah. Let's actually move ahead a couple. We're going to skip these for now. Skip to Michael Hayden's tweet. It's forward us a couple more. Yeah, here it is. General Michael Hayden, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Director of the National Security Agency, two of the highest, most sensitive positions in the United States government, should be non-political jobs. Here is Michael Hayden. Someone tweets, can we send the MAGA-wearing unvaxxed to Afghanistan? No use sending that plane back. General Michael Hayden, good idea. It's a good idea to send people who support President Trump, who decide not to get a certain medical treatment, to die in the front lines in Afghanistan. That shows a lot about the character of these people.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the interpretation or the understanding of the character of most people in Washington, they don't deserve high praise. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
You've met a few of them.
Yeah.
But it's the motivation. And one thing I wrestled with over the years is I do believe that a small number of people who truly believe in something and have an idea are very, very powerful, and they influence the rest. And when you get half of the population agreeing with these leaders, the ideological leaders, then things change. So it's a real struggle to see how they get away with this, and the people don't wake up because most people don't want to fight, and they go by and they're complacent and they're doing okay, and maybe somebody else will fix it up. But I tell you what, every once in a while in history and in society and politics, people finally will have to stand up. And I think that's what we're wrestling with, the blind acceptance what happened 18 months ago and do what the government tells us. That's your political and your duty, your moral duty. And it's the proper role of government is to take care of everybody. Yeah. And people go over it. But now we see more people and more people resisting. I love it when I see people out there, 50 or 60,000 people having fun.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's our hope, seeing the kinds of people, the kinds of character that Michael Hayden and so many others like him, James Clapper, the others, it's our fervent hope that middle America, who tends to be patriotic, they love the flag, that they would start seeing the kinds of creeps that are wrapping themselves in the flag and fleecing them. These people literally want to kill middle America. And the generals who've lied to us for 20 years about Afghanistan, the best equipped army in the world, greatest army, greatest fighting force in the world. Turns out they weren't that great because the whole thing was fake. It was all a lie. So we can just hope that patriotic Americans can be more patriotically skeptical of the military leadership, of the intelligence leadership, of the law enforcement leadership, because these people have shown themselves over and over again to be a very, very low character.
I keep wondering why we don't get more converts, and we do get some with the exposure of Robert Kennedy, because the Kennedys are tagged as being progressives and liberal Democrats and this sort of thing. Of course, JFK was exceptional because he was anti-war.
Yes.
But Robert Kennedy was I would say, of course, this is the son, but that family has always been progressive and liberal. And you would think that the progressives and liberals now that are just bowing to all this stuff, I don't know why, why we can't see even more attention given to Robert Kennedy, because what he does is he really gives credibility to what we say when we talk about corporatism and the power of the pharmaceutical industry. He is great on that.
Yeah.
So I think that the people should start, the ones who disagree with us generally, well, why is it that, one of your heroes, in a way, are saying, look, there's something screwy going on and you can't depend on what we have in government when they'd like to look at what they do to the Kennedys.
Well, our coalition with progressives has been battered over the past few years. That's true. But it still remains and it still holds in so many important areas. People like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi and others. There's Dennis Kucinich. There still are progressives out there, and there still are conservatives out there, because our relationship with conservatives hasn't always been that great either. But there still is a coalition, and we're hoping that, in this era where everything has to be atomized and torn apart, that we can actually continue to nurture a coalition with progressives and conservatives.
Well, we're going to rouse some real emotions right now.
Yeah.
So this is hitting below the belt.
Yeah.
And this is something where they're actually identifying, or I can identify mob psychosis. People are acting totally irrational over COVID and our foreign policy. None of that stuff makes sense to me, to take on an empire with a little understanding of history, the understanding of Afghanistan, totally ignored for 1,000 years, and also just the whole idea of how nations come and go, and it's usually overstretching overseas and thinking they can run the world, and we're at that point where I think we're obviously on a downturn. But this is not our policy right now, but it shows the psychology of what's happening. But I don't think we should look toward this country for our leadership.
No.
And we're going to be talking about Australia.
Australia. Put that clip up too, yeah.
Australian town council sparked outrage after killing rescue dogs to prevent COVID spread.
Yeah.
Now that's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. You know what? I'll bet we just have a few dog lovers. When my family gets together, I have to count how many dogs and how many grandkids there are, and we have a lot of dogs there. But this is just sort of really strange. First, can they prove that killing dogs, and these are rescue dogs? What were they thinking? Or is my assumption right? Or is this probably psychotic?
It is psychotic. The whole entire island is psychotic. But what the whole purpose of this was, okay, there are dogs in a shelter. They needed to be rescued by people. They were in a dog shelter. The government was so worried that people might leave their lockdown in their virtual prisons in their house and go try to get a dog, maybe to get a little bit of emotional comfort. They were afraid they would try to go to the dog shelter and get a dog, so they killed all the dogs. It's like going to a grocery store and burning all the groceries up because they're afraid people might go to get groceries. That's how sick things are in Australia. And I tell you, Australia over the weekend had massive, massive rallies against the lockdown in many parts, in New South Wales and et cetera. And we do actually applaud these people because they're courageous. And in fact, we've gotten several emails at the Ron Paul Institute from people in Australia, and some very long ones. You would not believe how tragic it is. They all end with the same thing: please pray for us. We are victims down here. We are in prison. You would not believe it. So I just hope, and we hope, that the Australians find a way to get their freedom back.
Well, you know, there's a saying that goes, first kill all the lawyers. Yeah. Over there, they say first kill all the dogs.
All the dogs, yeah, yeah.
So, no, that's really sad.
It is. And I have a couple of things. Speaking of Australia, let's put up this next clip. This shows how wonderfully their lockdowns are going. If we can put the next clip up here. Australia. Here are their lockdowns over and over and over. November 26th, the virus is eliminated. Lockdown, 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 lockdown. How many times have they locked down and the cases continue to go up? It's had zero effect, yet they continue doing it. And here's something else out of Romania, Dr. Paul, that makes me scratch my head. This is an orthopedic surgeon. Go to the next clip, please, and who tweeted this out over the weekend. Very fascinating. How do we explain the situation in Romania? Only 25% of the population is vaccinated. Cases and deaths are plummeting. The government is closing down vaccinating centers and selling the vaccines to the West. And go to the next one. Here's a little bit of a close-up on what's happening. And this is from Reuters. Daily reported infections and deaths are plummeting, even though less than a quarter of the population has taken the vaccine. And in fact, they're closing the vaccine centers and the COVID hospitals. This is a head scratcher. We have no idea what's going on, but we're grateful to the doctor from Romania for passing that information on. And that's it from me.
All right, very good. I want to close with a short quote from Thomas DiLorenzo, a friend of ours. He writes on Lou Rockwell's site frequently, because there's one thing that really bugs me, because we have to contend with the people who more or less want to bury the concept of natural immunity, and they want to totally ignore it, and they really do. You know, they want vaccines and the other stuff, and even if you have natural immunity, most of the time they ignore it. You know, that doesn't count. We've heard that, but Tom makes a statement here, which I think is real good. It's just a real short quote. He says, he's lamenting this fact. To return to the United States, one must fill out a CDC form in which you must declare that you have either had a COVID test that was negative in the past 3 days, or you have recovered from COVID, and Tom asks, and therefore presumably are naturally immune. There's total contradiction. Yeah. Yet they do that, but what they'll do is they'll look at that and probably say, well, we have to be stricter. You have to do it whether you've had it or not. And of course, there's evidence now, and I'm always suspect, is that the vaccines may be participating, you know, in the alteration of the virus and giving us those variants. And only time will tell, and it might always be confusing, because these cold viruses, they're very tricky, and they've been around for a long time. And but anyway, I want to thank our viewers today for tuning in to the Liberty Report. And just remember, our goal is to limit the size of government, because we want to maximize the effects on you with personal liberty, safety, and security without the government running and controlling our lives. It's a good goal, because quite frankly, I am convinced that the more freedom a country and a people have, the more prosperous they are, and the less wars that are fought. Peace and prosperity is the way to go with promoting personal liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.